Merritt Austin Edson was born in Rutland, Vermont, and grew up in Chester. After graduating from Chester High School in 1915, he attended the University of Vermont for 2 years. On June 27, 1916, he left college as a member of the 1st Infantry Regiment, Vermont National Guard, and was sent to Eagle Pass, Texas, for duty on the Mexican border. He returned to the university in September of 1916, but joined the Marine Corps Reserve on June 26th the following year. Hello and welcome to The Ultimate Sacrifice, created by Bill Reisen. My name is Louis Marsh. I'm your host for your show. I'm the senior pastor here of River Church in Parker, Arizona, and today we've got a story for you. It's huge, and we're not going to be able to tell you everything about Edson because Red Mike, as he was known, Edson lived an amazing life and a huge life. So we're going to focus in on Bloody Ridge because that's the action for which he was awarded the Medal of Honor. And with that said, let's jump in to the show. Edson saw no combat during World War I, although he was in France as part of the 11th Marines. Returning home, he was assigned to several positions that would qualify him for the high commands that he was to hold in later years. He developed an interest in military aviation, and he applied for flight training at NAS, that's Naval Air School, Pensacola, Florida, and he earned his gold wings as a naval aviator in 1922. Soon after, he was ordered to the Marine Air Station at Guam. Upon returning to the U.S. in 1925, he took an extensive course in advanced aviation tactics with the U.S. Army Air Service at Kelly Field, Texas, and then attended the company officers course at the Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia. He graduated with the highest grades ever attained by any student up to that time. For physical reasons, however, he had to give up his flying status in 1927 and continued his career as a ground officer. Beginning in the mid-1930s, the Marine Corps began experimenting with amphibious landings. General Holland M. Smith was the leader in this effort and also was searching for ways to incorporate light commando-type forces to help with raids on enemy positions. In June 1941, he personally picked Lieutenant Colonel Merritt A. Red Mike Edson to command a battalion in the 1st Marine Division and had assigned it to serve permanently with the Navy's APD Squadron. Smith began to refer to Edson's outfit as the Light Battalion or the APD Battalion. Edson's unit was unique in many ways. In a lengthy August 1941 report, the lieutenant colonel evaluated the organization and missions of his unit. He believed the APD battalion would focus primarily on reconnaissance, raids, and other special operations. In his mind, it was a waterborne version of the parachutists. To achieve rapid movement, Edson recommended a new table of organization, which made his force much lighter than other infantry battalions. At the very beginning of 1942, when the United States, now at war, and recruits were pouring into the Corps, Smith wrote the Major General Commandant and asked him to redesignate the battalion. On the 7th of January, Edson received word that he was now head of the 1st Separate Battalion. Then, on February 16th, 1942, Edson received word that the 1st Separate Battalion had been officially designated the 1st Raider Battalion. Colonel Edson's 1st Raiders were first introduced to combat in the early hours of August 7th, 1942, when the 1st Raiders attacked Tulagi as a part of the 1st Amphibious Ground Counteroffensive against the Japanese Empire. Another Marine Special Unit, the 1st Parachute Battalion, assaulted Gavutu the same morning. Meanwhile, across the Skylark Channel, the 1st Marine Division was beginning the Battle of Guadalcanal. 2 days of severe fighting, including standing off a vicious banzai charge on the first night, secured Tulagi. After his battalion relocated to Guadalcanal, they conducted raids on Savo Islands and, more famously, at Tasimboco, where they destroyed a Japanese supply base and wrecked their original plans for retaking Guadalcanal. He was awarded a Gold Star in lieu of a Second Navy Cross for his successful conduct of the Tulagi operation. Most of the 1st Marine Division and other attached units, such as the 1st and 2nd Raiders, were tasked to hold Guadalcanal and especially the airfield, Henderson Field, but General Vandergrift didn't have enough forces to establish a complete perimeter. He was also greatly concerned that the Japanese would attack along the coast, along with an amphibious invasion. This was where he was sure the main battles were going to be fought. However, Red Mike and Vandergrift's own colonels continually warned him that there were many reports of Japanese units moving through the jungle towards the ridge. He remained unmoved, however, leaving what was then called Lunga Ridge completely unoccupied. Finally, his chief of staff and others convinced him to position the 1st Raiders and what was left of the 1st Para-Marine Battalion, about 2 reduced companies, on the ridge to rest and rebuild. Vandergrift agreed and at the same time moved his headquarters to the end of the ridge closest to the airfield, much closer to where the enemy was about to attack. The Raiders arrived just hours before the first Japanese attack. Edson had reconnoitered the position and he knew exactly what needed to be done. He set his raiders to digging on the ridge and down its steep slope, ending with a 1,800-yard horseshoe defensive position. The Marines dug foxholes and strung whatever barbed wire they could get their hands on. Edson pushed them hard, knowing that an attack was likely that night. His forces, they totaled 800 men. Meanwhile, on the other side of the hill, the Japanese side, Kawaguchi was having all sorts of problems of his own. His men had marched for days, hacking their way through the dense Guadalcanal jungle, up and down steep hills and through ravines, even bringing some artillery with them. They were low on supplies, and by the time they arrived where they were supposed to be, it was just before the attack was scheduled to begin. Ka Force, as it was known, was composed of 3 groups. The group approaching the ridge was known as the Main Force and consisted of the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 124th Infantry and the 2nd Battalion of the 4th Infantry. Together there were about 3,000 of them. Their plan was simple: attack over the Lunga Ridge, seize it, set up their artillery and heavy weapons, and then close Henderson Field by fire. That would leave the Americans without supply or naval support, and they would be destroyed. Unknown to Kawaguchi, his opponent, General Vandergrift, had made his task easier by moving his HQ up to the ridge, where the Japanese would easily overrun it if, and only if, they could take that ridge. I have had the privilege of visiting Guadalcanal, with the Raiders actually, back in 2011, and spent an amazing couple of hours on Bloody Ridge. It easily dominates the entire area and is both higher and much steeper than I had thought before, even though I'd seen video, I've seen lots of still pictures, but yet it surprised me when I actually saw it, especially the first hill. The part of the ridge that was fought over might best be thought of as 2 hills with a small saddle between them. Author and historian Matthew Stevenson said this after visiting the ridge, quote, "If Guadalcanal was Gettysburg in the Pacific, then this, Edson's Ridge, was Little Round Top," unquote. An apt parallel in my mind. The exhausted raiders got into their foxholes as the sun was setting, some grabbing a bite to eat, others simply trying to rest for the ordeal that they knew was coming. The first night of the battle began when the Japanese naval cruiser Sendai began illuminating the ridge with its spotlights. Shortly afterwards, the first 2 battalions of Kawaguchi's force broke out of the jungle at a dead run. The Japanese were confused, with units intermingling and heading off course. Many got tied up in a swampy area to the right of the ridge. Others drove straight on up and around the ridge. In the darkness, the fighting soon broke down into hundreds of small group actions, and quite often one-on-one, hand-to-hand combat. The Japanese seemed to be everywhere, but so did Colonel Edson. He encouraged, cajoled, and yelled at his troops all night long. Calling in as much artillery fire as he could, Edson led his men throughout the first horrible night. When the daylight finally broke and the Japanese retired to the cover of the jungle, Edson reviewed his situation. He finally decided in the late afternoon to pull his Marines back. He said this in a post-war interview, quote, "To avoid an exposed right flank, we withdrew our forward elements to the battalion reserve line of the 12th. This actually extended our lines by at least 500 yards," unquote. So the Raiders had arrived on what would become known as Last Stand Hill. As the Raiders dug in, on, and around it, Edson stacked up a few ammo boxes on the hill and prepared to lead his men into combat once again. Now, I've been on Edson Ridge. I stood on that hill, and believe you me, it is flat as a pancake. It's not as tall as the first hill either, so you could get some fire that way. And I don't know for the life of me how Edson survived that night without being killed, but he did. That second night, it opened with 7 Japanese destroyers shelling the ridge as Japanese platoons quietly infiltrated forward, seeking openings in the Raider lines. Edson had put listening posts in front of his lines, a thin line of men who warned the main force of the incoming Japanese. Many of these were killed and wounded in their service. But many Japanese were channeling by the listening posts into killing areas. As the Raiders opened up and the battle began in earnest, more and more Japanese surged over the first hill and down towards Last Stand Hill. For a while, the Raiders and the Paramarines stood firm in the face of this onslaught, with the 11th Marines providing vital artillery support. That really should never be overlooked when you talk about this battle. Soon, hand-to-hand combat began again, and after hours of standing firm, Red Mike attempted one of the most difficult maneuvers in a battle, a slight pullback of some of his forces to tighten up his defensive lines. Pulling back under intense pressure became too much for the weary Paramarines, and they broke and ran, taking more than a few Raiders with them. This was the moment of crisis, and what happened next would decide how this battle went. Both Edson and his XO, Major Bailey, rose to the task, taking giant-sized risks. They stood and yelled at the men to get back on the line and fight. Bailey waved his pistol menacingly at the men, and they stopped and went back. Meanwhile, Edson ran to where the Paramarines were and yelled, quote, "The only difference between you and the Japs is that they've got more guts. Get back," unquote. A bit later, Edson gave the Paramarines a chance to redeem themselves and ordered them to counterattack. They did so in splendid fashion, smashing into the Japanese as they were starting to flank the hill, stopping them in their tracks. They suffered 40% casualties in this counterattack. Amazing. The battle wore on, but for the Raiders, led by Red Mike, a nickname, by the way, that he picked up in Nicaragua for the red beard that he had grown back then, they held firm. It was his finest hour. It's difficult to be precise about total casualties on the battle. The Japanese may have suffered up to 800 killed in the immediate aftermath of the battle, with many more casualties on their long march through the jungle back to Japanese lines. Estimates of Raider casualties vary from 166 to 135, with the most accurate count being 34 Raiders dying on that ridge and 129 wounded. In May of 1943, Barrett Edson was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions on those 2 nights. He went on to serve throughout the war. Afterwards, he continued his career and retired from the Marine Corps in great distinction. He did so, retired in 1947. He went on to revitalize the Vermont State Police and was president of the National Rifle Association from 1949 to 1950. He died on August 14, 1951, and there still is great controversy about his death today. Returning home from a night at a local bar, he parked his car in the garage and was found the next morning dead from carbon monoxide poisoning. He left no note behind, so no one can be sure if he killed himself or just passed out from his drinking and died. Most of the people who knew him personally swore that he would never kill himself. But the truth is, we're just never gonna know. There's so much more to talk about, Red Mike, and we might do so in a future episode. But for now, that's the end of our story. A man who stood firm, commanded his men, shared their risks, and changed the war and helped us win the war. That man received the Medal of Honor, and we are grateful and thankful to him for doing what he did. My name's Louis Marsh. I'm the senior pastor of River Church, and I thank you for watching. I thank you for listening. Check out the QR code right over here. That's the link to my other podcast called Tales from the Scrypt, where we look at the Bible and we look at history and we look at the Bible stories and see what archaeology says about it. And you just might be surprised. Some pretty amazing stuff. So I hope you'll check all that out. And until next time, this is Louis saying thank you so much for watching. God bless you, and I'll see you later.